What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On NBA, the biggest stories with the local experts. I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, also host of Locked On Rockets right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Today, we'll be joined by Nick Angstadt from Locked On Mavericks. As the Houston Rockets and Dallas Mavericks planning to consummate a trade, sending Christian Wood to the Dallas Mavericks for 4 players and a late first-round draft pick in this year's NBA draft. What does this trade mean for both sides, from the Rockets' perspective and the Dallas Mavericks' perspective? Is Christian Wood the right big to pair with Luka Doncic? But first, a quick message to my friends over at BetOnline, because BetOnline.net is your number one source for all of your sports betting needs and info. Find the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's NHL playoffs and Major League Baseball. And of course, BetOnline has you covered for all the fighting news as well. MMA, UFC, boxing, you name it, they've got it there. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information. They've got you for live betting, esports, the NBA draft, and more. And speaking of the NBA draft, right now you can take a look at who is the odds-on favorite to be the number 1 overall pick in this year's NBA draft. Right now, Jabari Smith Jr. minus 185 to go number 1 overall. The favorite at number 2, Chet Holmgren at minus 150 to be the 2nd overall selection. And then who's going to go 3rd overall? Paolo Banchero's the favorite there at minus 600. So for those odds and more, be sure to check out BetOnline. It's the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events. They've got everything that you could possibly need. Head to their website today or use your mobile device to learn about the trends and action available to you. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. Joining us now is Nick Angstadt from Locked On Mavericks. You can follow on Twitter at Nick Van Exit. Nick, we've discussed this most recent trade, the Woj bomb, if you will, landing in the NBA landscape here. Christian Wood being dealt to the Dallas Mavericks for a handful of players: Trey Burke, Marquise Chris, Sterling Brown, and Boban Marjanovic, as well as the 26th overall pick in this year's NBA draft. You had your instant reaction on Locked On NBA when the trade broke. Yeah, live on the channel when the trade broke. We've sat with it now for a few days. Has your opinion of this trade changed at all? Like, how have you kind of come to let this trade resonate with you and what it means for the Dallas Mavericks to acquire a guy like Christian Wood?
Yeah, when I initially saw this trade, bringing Christian Wood in and the Mavericks not giving up any rotation players, from some of the rumors and some of the things that reporters have been saying, it sounds like they weren't even going to use that pick, the 26th pick, on like a player that they wanted to roster. So it sounded like they're going to do a draft and stash with somebody or trade it for future draft capital or something like that, because they do have a bunch of players on that roster. Now, they did get rid of 4 of the back end guys that didn't play at all. They played a total of 90 minutes in the playoffs this past year, and the Mavs went 3 rounds. So that's nothing for those 4 players combined to play. And so if to add basically what a starter for the Dallas Mavericks, and to get rid of the 4 end of the bench players, they were going to have to get rid of a couple of them to keep Theo Pinson and or Boban, and then to send that 26th pick. I initially had thought it was a little bit more of a risk than I do now. The risk of giving up that 26th pick, the risk of taking on Christian Wood with the expiring contract, and well, maybe if it doesn't work out, and some of the issues that he had in Houston and some of the issues he's had to start his career in the NBA, like maybe that stuff catches up with him and it just doesn't work out or pan out as much in Dallas. Maybe it's Kristaps Porzingis 2.0, where he's just saying, I want my shots. I want to handle the ball. It's different issues than Porzingis, but some of them the same, where he wants to have it his own way. And if that doesn't work, then all of a sudden the Mavs could lose him for nothing. And then they lose that 26th pick for nothing. They don't get a shot at a player that could maybe be in the rotation. They don't get a shot at trading that pick or packaging it for a bigger player, anything else like that. But now that I've thought about it a little bit more, knowing that they weren't really going to use that 26th pick for anything big, and seeing more of Christian Wood, seeing more of what he can be, I think that the Mavs made an incredible move with this one. Christian Wood comes in and like does a couple of things the Mavs really, really need.
Yeah, it's so funny from the Rockets' perspective of this, which is weird because the way we do these Locked On NBA segments, it feels like we bring in one specific host to talk about their team, and it's like we're in the boat where we both get to talk about both sides of this deal from Rockets and Mavericks. And so From Locked On Rockets, here's Jackson Gatlin, who you can follow on Twitter at JT Gatlin. No, I can't
Should I
do
throw
that,
it back to you?
Yeah, it's terrible. No, always got to derail it when you and I are on a podcast together. But
it always happens.
Always. But from the Rockets' perspective, this feels like one of those few, like, almost win-win trades because the Mavericks are, like, getting away. It's not quite like highway robbery, but again, to give up 4 players who weren't part of this past playoff rotation for a guy who is going to come in and be a starter, that's great for the Mavericks. From the Rockets' perspective, they were basically in a position kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, trying to figure out they just needed to deal Christian Wood because they're going to walk away with one of the top selections in this year's NBA draft. More than likely, Paolo Banchero at pick number 3, less than a week from now, with the NBA draft right around the corner. They've got Alperen Şengün, who showed a lot of flashes this past season. And even though in a vacuum, the return for Christian Wood, not exactly the absolute best, just a late first-round draft pick, they're also, depending on when the trade is officially consummated, they'll generate some version of a traded TPE to go along with it, either around like $4 million or like $4.25 million, somewhere in that vicinity. So those are the 2 actual assets you get from the trade. But past that, you also get, like, Jalen Green becomes the true alpha for the Houston Rockets. Alperen Şengün is now cemented as your new starting center moving forward. There's more certainty, more clarity for the Rockets rebuilding timeline moving forward now that they have moved on from Christian Wood. But when you look at this trade and really what it means for the Dallas Mavericks, how crazy is it to think, Nick, that you've got a Mavericks team that made it to the Western Conference Finals, right? You know, Luka Doncic finally broke through the first round, not only the first round, broke through the first round and the second round to go to the Western Conference Finals.
Yeah, twist the knife, Brendan Clean.
Yeah, unfortunately getting bounced by the Warriors, but to get there and to now add a guy like Christian Wood to that core and to have Tim Hardaway Jr. next season, right? To add those 2 guys to this core that already made it to the Western Conference Finals, that's going to be huge for this Mavericks team.
It should be huge. It's going to add a lot of offense. And plus, the Mavericks only had Dinwiddie and Davis Bertans for like the last, couple months of the regular season as well. So this offense for the Mavericks should be really, really good this year. It was 12th last year when the last couple of years before that, they were number 1 in the NBA, number 2 or 3 in the NBA, I think the last couple of years. And so the offense should be a lot better. The Mavs kind of have an answer at every single level of, okay, if we can't score in this way, we can bring in this guy. If we can't score the Jalen Brunson herky-jerky, ISO way, we're going to throw in Spencer Dinwiddie, and he gets north-south, gets to the rim, can finish with contact, can get to the line. If we can't score that way, well, we got the Tim Hardaway who can hit a bunch of jumpers like outside. If he's hot, then kind of nobody can stop him. And so there's just all kinds of different options for the Mavericks. You got Christian Wood. He can now, pick and roll, pick and pop. He can do he can handle off the dribble a little bit as well. So they just have a ton of different answers for defenses on offense. And it may come as a sacrifice to their defense because you see they had to really shore up their rotation. The Mavericks, one of the reasons why I think they flamed out so hard against the Warriors is because they had been going just at it and just going at it since January, basically. They were just going and going and going. They were playing a shorter rotation, and Nico Harrison said it after the playoff run. They ran Dorian Finney-Smith and Reggie Bullock into the ground because they needed those guys so much. They needed to rely on them to basically set their identity. Their identity was a team that defended really well, could switch a ton, could play defense as well as anybody in the league. And then Luka and Brunson were going to give them just enough buckets so that they could win games. And that was the formula that worked for them all the way to the Western Conference Finals. And so now bringing in these other 2 guys, Christian Wood, Tim Hardaway Jr., they're not helping your defense any. They're extending that rotation, and now there's more players in the rotation that can't defend as well, but it increases that offense more, and so it should equal more regular season wins. It's just going to be a matter of, okay, does Jason Kidd have enough gravitas? Does he have enough, pull and say with some of these guys that he's going to bench some of them in a playoff rotation possibly, and they're going to have to be okay with that and keep playing team ball because their chemistry was another big reason why they made that run.
And by adding those 2 other guys, right, to the rotation, it should basically help kind of maybe alleviate some of the pressure on some of those guys that were kind of like run into the ground a little bit by maybe not having to ride those guys nearly as much in the regular season, really like, squeezing every bit of production out of them that you possibly could. In your mind, Nick, if the Mavericks can come away and let's say they're a top 3 offense next season, what do you think the floor of their defense has to be, like the bare minimum to be, a top 4 seed again in the Western Conference? Do you think like middle of the pack? Would you like to see it a little bit higher than that? Like where do you think you'd be okay with their defense sitting if they're a top 3 offense?
Yeah, I don't know if there's like a ranking. The ranking from last year. So the Mavericks finished the full season, according to Cleaning the Glass, the 8th best defense, the 12th best offense. And so they played kind of two different seasons last year. They played that beginning of the season where they had a million, hardship penalty guys that came in, COVID guys that came in. Like Isaiah Thomas was on this team, Brandon Knight was on this team. Like there's just so many different players that you forget were on the Mavericks last year. And so then they played the second half of the season where they actually finally locked in. Jalen Brunson even talked about it on Duncan Robinson's pod recently. They said, well, they had a stretch of games where they played without Luka, and then they won a couple of them. And they said, okay, well, when Luka comes back, we're going. And then Luka came back after a little break, and then they went for it, and their defense was incredible. They were just playing the best basketball that they had played in a long time. And so you wonder if that carries over to next year. And if that carries over to next year, then that is a really good defense. And then hopefully the offense increases more because of these two guys that you added. But you're adding two new players to the rotation. So can you play that same level of defense with these two, with Tim Hardaway Jr.? The defense that we saw from him last time out was not great. The defense we saw from Christian Wood in Houston was, as you know, Jackson, not very good in certain stretches. So I don't know. If they can be top 10 in both, obviously that's an incredible season for somebody. The Mavericks were almost top 10 in both last year. And so I think that's the goal. Get top 10 in both. Can you just stay around 10 or 8, I guess, on defense like you were this past year? And can you get to top 10 on offense? That's the goal for anybody.
What are the impacts and implications from this Christian Wood trade for both sides? If you're interested in the Rockets angle, be sure to check me out over at Locked On Rockets. I'll keep you updated over there, as well as be sure to check out Locked On Mavericks for the future of Christian Wood as a Dallas Maverick. Of course, Nick, you're going to have us covered there for all things Dallas Mavericks. Appreciate you stopping by Locked On NBA with me.
Boom.